மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.
Welcome back to chapter 3 of this course, and in this video we're going to be talking about interference, which is really one of the coolest themes in all of chess. So if you're not familiar with this one, I think you're in for a real treat. And as the name suggests, interference tactics are all about interfering with the enemy pieces, getting in their way. And I think it's best described with an example, so we should just jump right into it. Here we have the end of another study by the great Russian composer Alexei Trotsky. He's really one of my favorites, so you'll be seeing a lot of his studies throughout this course. And as we can see, white has two very strong pass pawns here, one on a7 and one on e7. But the problem for white is that, number one, white is down a rook. Number two, both of these pawns are defended by the enemy pieces. The bishop covers the a8 promotion square and the rook covers the e8 promotion square. Well, with one move, white is able to interfere with both pieces. And that move is, of course, bishop to e4. A really, really gorgeous shot. I remember the first time I saw this kind of move, I was really, really stunned. And so what has white done? Well, with one move, white has now blocked off both of black's pieces, meaning that white now has two mate threats on the board. If either of these pawns promote, it's going to be a direct checkmate to black's king. And whichever way black takes this bishop, black can take two different ways, either with the rook or with the bishop. One of black's pieces will be blocking off the other one. So if black takes with the rook, white promotes the a pawn and wins the game. And of course, if black takes with the bishop, then the rook is blocked off and white promotes the e pawn and wins the game this way. So a really, really beautiful idea. A nice little quiet move, but there's nothing black can do. No checks, no way to stop both pawns from promoting. And that's it. White is just winning the game. A quick tip for when you're looking for these kinds of ideas is to try to spot the square where the opponent's pieces intersect. In this case, it was this e4 square. This is where both pieces were trying to use the square and kind of fighting over each other. And so this is where white's piece needs to go to deliver the key interference idea. But with that, let's go to our next example. This next study is another classic composed by Hewacker. And here it's white to play and win. And right away, with such reduced material, we really have to be very, very precise in this kind of position. The first move that we would kind of want to analyze is what happens if white was able to play h7 here. And although the pawn can be pushed to h7, the problem is that black is going to stop the pawn from promoting with this move e4. And once this diagonal opens up for black's bishop, white is just not really able to get the pawn going, and black's king is going to be able to slowly pick up the pawn. So instead, white has a really fantastic way of stopping black from being able to stop this pawn, and that is to start with really ingenious move bishop to d4. A real shocker. I mean, this bishop can, of course, be taken both ways, either with the bishop or with the pawn. At first glance, the move looks absolutely crazy. But it does come with a really, really fantastic point. So let's take a look. Well, after e takes d4, you might already realize that white's idea is not to advance the pawn. Then once again, black would be in time with d3 check and open up the diagonal. But instead, white plays the quiet move king to d3, simply blockading the d pawn and not allowing black to free their bishop. And now white's pawn is simply running home. Black's king is behind the pawn and unable to catch it. So after king to d3, black can simply resign. White is just promoting the pawn and game over. So really, really nice blockading idea here. But what happens if after bishop d4, black takes with the bishop? And once again, if white pushes h7, then black is going to be pushing e4 and opening up the bishop. And once again, instead of pushing the pawn, white starts off with a very nice quiet move, king to d3. And now the threat is finally to push the pawn, where e4 check is going to be met with king takes d4. So this bishop is under attack. Black can't really push the pawn right away. The king, of course, is still too slow. White is just advancing. And after e4 check, king takes d4, it's game over. So what can black do? Well, black can continue to try to keep the bishop alive with a move like bishop to a1, keeping the bishop on this diagonal. And once again, if white pushes h7, that's going to be met with e4 check, opening up the bishop. So what does white need to do to win? I think you guys are probably catching on by this point. That's right, king to e4, blocking the e pawn once again. Now this pawn cannot get out of the way to open up the bishop, and white's h pawn is simply running home and winning the game. So really beautiful idea. And the point of this bishop d4 move was really just to win one tempo. If white were to start with the move king to d3 in the original position, hoping to get this blockade, then black would be wise to just throw the pawn immediately, opening up the bishop's diagonal and preparing to bring the king in. For example, king takes e4, king h5, and white is not in time to bring the bishop back because black will simply take on d4, and after king takes d4, king takes h6. We're going to have a draw. So king d3 would be too slow, and after bishop to d4, white is able to win just one tempo, the one tempo white needs to win this position. After bishop takes d4, king to d3 was the key point. Black's pawn is not in time to advance to e4. The bishop drops back to a1, and white's king has gained an extra move to get to this key e4 blockading square, and now allowing the h-pawn to finally promote. So a really ingenious solution. I think this is a very nice classic, an idea really worth imprinting into your pattern recognition, because you will see many studies incorporating a similar theme to this one, where we really try to blockade the enemy pieces from being able to defend against our passed pawns. And for our next example here, we have puzzle number 2 in this chapter. And I think this is kind of a nice representation of the type of puzzles you might see throughout the rest of the chapter. Here it is white to play and win. And this one is not as tricky as the previous two examples. So I would invite you to pause your video and try to figure this one out for yourself before returning and checking out the solution. Okay, well, once again, white has just one pawn remaining on the board, this passed a-pawn. But if white tries to immediately advance it with a7, black is simply going to play rook to a1 in this position, stopping the pawn, and white is not going to be able to win this game. Instead, what can white do to actually win? Well, white can throw in the very crafty check, bishop a5, sealing off the a-file and giving check to black's king. Once again, we're looking for very forcing moves when it comes to the solutions to these puzzles. And after bishop a5 check, black can either take the bishop or step to the side, but one way or another, the a-pawn is now running forward. After king takes a5, for example, white pushes a7, and black's poor rook has no way of stopping this a-pawn. If rook to g1 check, white's king simply hides behind the f-pawn. Now there are no more good checks. No way for black's rook to use the a-file, no way to use the eighth rank, and white's pawn is just promoting. So that's going to be the kind of puzzle that you'll see throughout this chapter. So I hope you're ready to find these nifty little interfering moves. And like I've been mentioning before, I would encourage you to spend up to around 5 minutes for each puzzle. You can definitely take more time if you need to, and really make sure to review the solutions of all the puzzles that you get wrong. I think that's really critical as you work your way through this course. With that, I'll wish you the best of luck in the exercises, and I'll see you in the next chapter. Take care.
மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.